Morning everyone, thanks for coming. I'm struggling to think of a connection we've done, but I suppose what you could say is that these maps, as you'll see when you look at them, they've all been folded in a really bad way, so there's a done connection with the fact they've been folded. I'm going to talk very briefly about where these maps facing you came from, and then Andy's going to take over and he's going to talk to you about what the maps actually show, because the maps deal with a really important battle in the Second World War. The maps came to us just at the start of the year. They came from a military historian, and we think he got them from the Ministry of Defence. The Ministry of Defence, or the old War Office as was, during the war, after the war, they would capture German mapping, German supplies, and they don't keep any archives, so they give them away to us, British Library, Cambridge, Wales and Scotland. And we have got a large collection of maps from the Ministry of Defence and from the War Office. Maps of the Second World War, maps of the First World War, maps from the Boer War, and so on. But these are really important for us because we haven't got many maps in the collection which are annotated and with additional manuscripts. And these in particular show a really important battle in stages, which Andy will talk about. So we got donated 119 maps of this area. It's of the Eastern Front in the Soviet Union. So it's basically what is now Ukraine, Belarus and part of Russia. And the maps are all at a 1 to million scale, so they are showing a very, very large detail. A very, very large area, sorry, not much detail. And as I said before, you know, the maps have been joined together by the Italian army to make a bigger map so they could plot their movements, their troop dispositions, which is causing us some problems because the glue's starting to fall apart, the maps are starting to separate out. So we're storing them in Swindon very carefully, not many maps per drawer, but in the future they're going to start to separate out. So we're going to have to think about conservation and storage on these maps, but they are really, really important. I'll hand you over to Andy, but I just wanted to say before I do, just in case I forget to say at the end, that maps quite often lie. They'll show you a place and they'll show you a landscape, which in reality wouldn't have existed at the times the maps were made. Certainly the times the maps were annotated, you get further on. This one is from summer of 1942, and it would have been lovely green open countryside for the German and the Axis troops to race across. But when you get to these maps here, you're looking at the winter of 1942-43. It would have been totally snowed. So all these maps really should be white, just to give an idea of what the landscape would look like. But as I say, maps, they lie quite nicely sometimes. I'm going to hand you over to Andy, and he's going to talk to you more about what the maps actually mean.
Okay, so just to give you a bit of context with what's going on at this point in the war, Hitler has attacked Russia, the Soviet Union, in 1941 and failed to defeat Russia. So he's going to have another go in the summer of 1942. And he can't afford, he hasn't got enough soldiers to attack across the whole of the front as he did in 1941. So he's just going to focus on the southern part of the front, pushing across the River Volga, and sweeping down. The plan for the Germans is they're going to sweep across this part of Russia, and then they're going to sweep down into the Corsicas, this area, which is this huge area sweeping down, where there's a tremendous amount of oil and other natural resources to sustain their war effort. When France fell in 1940, they managed to capture enough oil and what military historians call POL, petrol, oil and lubricant. They captured enough from France to keep them going almost to this point, so they needed more, as well as the limited resources they had in Romania. It's worth bearing in mind that in the summer of 1942, the British High Command is still pretty convinced that the Germans are going to defeat the Russians in the east, because they have little confidence in the Russians' ability to ultimately beat the Axis forces. Other things that are going on at this time, the Japanese Empire is sweeping across the Pacific, the Philippines have fallen, and in North Africa, Rommel has destroyed 50% of the 8th Army, and what's left has fallen back on El Alamein, and he's in a pretty bad way. So if you look at these maps, this is very interesting. So these are German war maps, annotated in Italian, and if you look at this little banner, there's this kind of strange little Roman Legion black shirt badge, which signifies the Italian 8th Army, which is perhaps approximately 150,000 Italian troops, who are an allied army alongside the German forces. There's Hungarians, Croatians, Romanians and Italians supporting the Germans in this big effort. So it's a huge offensive in the south. So as the battle develops, I've printed off some photographs to sort of show some interest in terms of trying to make it a little more personal. They're Bundesarchiv photographs. So that's the German army in the summer of 1942, professional, well equipped. It's mastered integrated air warfare with tank warfare, sweeping forward again. And as they drive forward, they drive across this area that we're talking about in the direction of Stalingrad. And a whole army group, a whole great mass of German troops, Army Group A, sweeps into the Corsica, captures Rostov and goes south, while this group pushed towards Stalingrad. And Stalingrad is a Soviet boom city of the 1930s with a population of nearly 500,000 people, built along the River Volga. And as Andrew Roberts said, every time there's a decision that Hitler has to make, and it's a choice between a common sense war-winning decision or an ideological decision, Hitler will take the latter. So they plunge towards Stalingrad to capture that city because it's got Stalin's name, and it's viewed as a test of strength by the Germans. Now there's another issue that affects the Axis forces, particularly the German army, in the summer of 1942, which ties in strangely with this picture that's about to go into the Treasured exhibition, and that they captured a tremendous amount of transport vehicles from the British and the French in 1940, including Morris trucks. That's a 1930s Morris advert, which is about to go into the exhibition. It was the cover identity for the advertising exhibition. Now, unfortunately, even though you can make parts, it's always better when you've got the factory, you've got the spares, and the nearest Morris garage for the Germans is probably in Lowestoft. So that's no use at all. So as Stuart said, it's a scale of 1,000,000 to 1, these maps. It's a tremendous amount of distance. And as they pour across, they begin to besiege Stalingrad, and little do they know that the Russian general who's masterminding what's going to be an enormous counterattack, Marshal Georgy Zhukov, is stopping reinforcements of Russian soldiers going to Stalingrad because he knows his generals will just get them killed, and he's holding them back, an enormous force of Russian troops for his counterattack, which is going to take place in November 1942. This is an interesting photograph. That's a German soldier fighting on the outskirts of Stalingrad. He's using a captured Soviet submachine gun because it's better than the one that he's been issued with. He's clearly a veteran from his badges. You can see the strain growing on his face. And then eventually, they're locked in to the street fighting of Stalingrad, and there's some pictures here to look at in a minute, which gives you an idea. And going from a situation where all the troops spread across the steppe, which is now frozen, they're concentrated into city fighting. And that will just suck in soldiers, and it just uses soldiers up. You need thousands of soldiers to capture a city centre, because every spot can be defended, things can be booby-trapped, all sorts of things going on. And there's some pictures there of Soviet troops. That's quite an important one. That's the Red October factory, which was a scene of ferocious fighting at this point. And then the Russians counterattack, and they managed to encircle Stalingrad, and the Italian 8th Army, which has got their little banner there on that badge, gets hammered, because what the Russians do is they attack the Allied armies either side of the German 6th Army. So they attack the weaker supporting parts, and they encircle the Germans in Stalingrad. And as Stuart points out, there you can see, there's Stalingrad. There's a larger pocket. And as time goes by, looking at Stuart's labels, that thumbnail, 6th Army, gets smaller and smaller as the Germans pinch it. All the German forces that raced into the Corsica somehow managed to get out, just about, via Rostov. And then, as time goes by, more and more they're pinched off, more and more the German efforts to relieve Stalingrad fail. And you can see, with all these annotations on the maps, you can see there's the Italian 8th Army, which has been displaced. Stalingrad's all the way over there, cut off. The red arrows show the Russian attacks that are going on. And obviously at the same time what's going on in North Africa, Montgomery's won at El Alamein, and the Americans have landed in North Africa, at Casablanca and Algiers, which is a massive force coming into play in World War II. And then finally, the last map shows, terribly, there's a red cross through 6th Army, and there's the Italian word for remnants, and that's the end of the German 6th Army at Stalingrad, and that's quite a powerful picture. In that picture, there's a very well-dressed, well-equipped Soviet soldier with the same submachine gun that the Germans picked up in the picture down there, and a very unfortunate German soldier who looks like he's wearing some sort of bearskin coat, which probably was flown in, having been donated by German civilians after Goebbels' appeal. because again they were short of winter clothing. And that's the story of the maps. It's the annotations that are very interesting, and it shows a total enormous military disaster and the turning point of World War II. The Germans and the Axis forces lost about 800,000 men. The Soviets lost probably 1.1 million men and an unknown number of civilians. 91,000 Germans were captured in Stalingrad and only 5,000 got home to Germany after the war. So that's the tragedy of what the maps show.
Thank you, mate. Lovely. So just very quickly, so you can look at the maps. On this side, I bought items that have been in the collection for quite a long time. And these would have come to us from the Ministry of Defence. So this colourful one here is a geological map of the area around Stalingrad. It's folded in half, so it's too big to put on the table. Stalingrad, if I put the label next to Stalingrad, you can see where Stalingrad is. It shows the brown soil that the Germans had to go through at Stalingrad, which is very loose soil. And it says in German on the text on the other side that it's very poor water retention, very poor travel. So straight away, just the landscape was against the Germans in Stalingrad. It also shows with these blue lines, the levels of frost per month. It shows you how many months it will be frost. So it shows you that Stalingrad had 4 months of frost to show you how long that winter went on for. On this other side, there is just one of a number of maps of the Eastern Front. This is Stalingrad, 1942, and it shows areas past Stalingrad that the Germans wanted to capture. There's also text on the side which talks about population, economics, geology, landscape, and there's a lovely bit in the climate bit where it says, winter short but very cold. And then to finish, these pamphlets here, the Germans made pamphlets like this for every country they were interested in. So for Britain, for instance, there's 10 of these. For Russia, there's over 40. And this is one that covers Stalingrad, and you get books of text explaining the countryside and the government and things like that. You get maps, and you also get a book of photographs. So in this photograph, there are bridges, factories, logistical places the Germans would have been interested in. I've marked up where the photographs of Stalingrad are. Feel free to come have a rummage. Andy and I will hang around. But please look at that. Before I say, Andy sort of hinted this, that I wanted to say that when we do these sorts of show and tells, we talk about the importance of the collection, we talk about the rarity or the historical importance or the age of the items, but we don't often talk about the emotional weight of the items. And these are, the emotional weight of these items is quite incredible. We haven't really got anything else like this in that collection, which is why it's so important. Hope you enjoy the maps.